The day was bright and filled with noise in the great Philistine city. A massive festival was happening to honor their god, Dagon. The Philistine lords and all the important people gathered in the grand temple. They believed Dagon had given them a great victory. They had finally captured their strongest enemy, a man named Samson. He was an Israelite, a Nazirite chosen by God, famous for his incredible, almost magical strength. For years, his power had been a source of fear for them, a constant threat to their rule. Now they felt safe and triumphant, ready to celebrate their success in a way everyone would remember for a very long time. Inside the temple, the air was thick with the smell of incense and roasting meat. Music played loudly from pipes and drums, and people were singing songs of praise to their stone idol Dagon. Thousands of Philistines filled the main hall and the roof of the temple. They were all there to see the main event of the celebration. They wanted to see the mighty Samson, the man who had single-handedly defeated their armies, brought low and humbled before them. This was more than just a party. It was a display of power, a message to everyone that the Philistines and their god were supreme and could not be challenged by anyone. The lords of the Philistines sat on their ornate thrones, smiling and drinking from golden cups. They talked loudly about their great achievement. "We have him at last," one would say. "The man who destroyed our fields and killed our soldiers is now our plaything." They felt very proud and very powerful. They had used trickery and gold to find the secret of his strength, and now their prize was ready to be shown to the cheering crowds. The people eagerly awaited the moment they would get to look upon the fallen hero, to see for themselves that he was no longer a threat to their land or their people. The temple itself was a magnificent building, a testament to the wealth and power of the Philistines. It was held up by two enormous central pillars, carved with images of their gods and battles. These pillars were the heart of the structure, supporting the heavy roof where many more spectators had gathered for a better view of the spectacle below. Everyone felt secure within the strong walls of their temple, ready to mock the man who had once made them tremble with fear. They had no idea that this grand celebration of their victory would soon turn into a scene of unimaginable destruction and final judgment for them all. Suddenly, a great shout went up from the crowd. The heavy doors of the temple swung open, and two guards led a man in chains into the center of the hall. It was Samson, but he was not the fearsome warrior they remembered. His long hair, the source of his divine strength, had been cut short. His eyes, which once flashed with fire and determination, were now empty, blinded sockets. He stumbled as he walked, guided by a young boy who held his hand. The strong man, the champion of Israel, was now a weak and helpless prisoner, a sight that made the Philistines roar with laughter and delight. The crowd began to taunt him, their voices filled with hatred and scorn. "Look at the mighty Samson," one man yelled. "He is as weak as a kitten," another shouted. "Make him dance for us. Let the strong man entertain his masters." They threw small stones and bits of food at him, enjoying his humiliation. The jeers echoed through the vast temple, each word a sharp sting to Samson's spirit. He stood silently in the middle of the floor, the chains on his wrists and ankles clinking with every small movement, a sound that only made the Philistines cheer louder and with more fervor. The Philistine lords watched from their high seats, thoroughly enjoying the show. They ordered the guards to make Samson perform tricks, to show everyone how completely he had been broken. "Make him grind grain like an animal," one lord suggested, and the crowd roared in agreement. They wanted to strip away every last piece of his dignity, to make him an object of ridicule for all to see. To them, this was the ultimate revenge. It wasn't enough to capture him. They needed to destroy his legend and make his name a joke for generations to come in their land. Samson endured the insults with a quiet stillness. He could hear the hatred in their voices and feel the contempt in their laughter. He was their prisoner, their entertainment for the day. He had been betrayed and defeated, and now he was paying the price in front of his greatest enemies. Every shout and every laugh was a painful reminder of his failure and the loss of his great gift from God. Yet, deep within his heart, a small ember of his old fire remained, waiting for one last chance to burn brightly and fulfill his destiny. Hidden in the shadows, away from the main crowd, a woman watched the scene with a heavy heart. It was Delilah. She wore fine clothes and jewels, the reward she had received for betraying Samson's secret. But the silver and gold felt cold and worthless now, as she looked upon the man she had once claimed to love. She saw his blinded eyes and the chains that bound him, and a wave of guilt and sorrow washed over her. This was the result of her greed. She had sold his strength, and with it, a part of her own soul, all for a bag of coins. Delilah watched as the Philistines mocked Samson. She heard their cruel jokes and saw their triumphant smiles. Each insult directed at him felt like a blow to her own heart. She remembered a different Samson, a man full of laughter and life, a man whose strength was a wonder to behold. Now he was a broken figure, a source of sport for the very people who had paid her to destroy him. She had never imagined this. She thought they would simply hold him prisoner, not subject him to such a terrible and public humiliation. The sight was more than she could bear. A part of her wanted to run to him, to cry out and beg for their forgiveness. She felt a desperate urge to tell him she was sorry, to somehow undo the terrible thing she had done. But she was trapped by her own actions. She was one of them now, a hero to the Philistines for her treachery. If she showed any pity for Samson, she would be seen as a traitor to them as well. So she stood frozen in her place, a silent observer of the tragedy she had created, her beautiful face a mask of hidden pain and deep regret. She saw the guards push him and the people jeer, and she clutched the railing in front of her. Was this what victory felt like? It felt empty and bitter. The cheering of the crowd sounded like a horrible noise in her ears. She had gotten everything she thought she wanted: wealth, status, and the favor of the Philistine lords. But in doing so, she had lost the only thing that might have been real. She watched Samson, her heart aching with a love that was now mixed with the terrible poison of her own betrayal. The high priest of Dagon approached Samson, his robes sweeping the floor. He carried a golden bowl of wine. "Kneel, Samson!" the priest commanded in a loud, booming voice that carried throughout the temple. "Kneel before the great god Dagon, who has delivered you into our hands. Acknowledge his power over you and your god." The crowd grew quiet, waiting to see the final humiliation. They wanted to see the champion of the God of Israel bow down to their stone idol. This would be the ultimate proof of their God's superiority and their complete victory over their enemy. Samson stood tall, his chained hands clenched into fists. Though his eyes could not see, he turned his head toward the sound of the priest's voice. A deep, clear voice, a voice that still held a trace of its old power, came from his lips. "I will not kneel," Samson declared. "I will not bow to your god of stone and wood." The crowd gasped. They could not believe his defiance. Even now, blinded and in chains, he refused to submit. His spirit was not as broken as they had thought it was. The priest's face turned red with anger. "You dare defy the great Dagon," he spat. "Bow, you fool, or we will make your suffering even worse." The guards pushed Samson's shoulders, trying to force him to his knees. But Samson resisted. He planted his feet firmly on the stone floor, his body like a rock. He would not give them this satisfaction. He had lost his strength, his freedom, and his sight because of his own mistakes. But he would not lose his faith. He would not betray his God, not even in this dark and hopeless moment. His refusal sent a ripple of anger and surprise through the crowd. This was not the broken man they had expected. His defiance was an insult to them and their God. The lords of the Philistines began to shout orders, their festive mood turning sour. "Force him down," they yelled. "Make the Israelite dog bow." But Samson's spirit remained unbroken. In that moment, he was not just a prisoner. He was a symbol of unwavering faith, a final testament to the God he served, even as he stood on the brink of death in the house of his enemies. After the shock of his defiance faded, Samson seemed to grow weary. The effort of standing against the guards had taken a toll on his tired body. He spoke again, but this time his voice was softer, filled with exhaustion. "I am tired," he said to the young boy who had been guiding him. "Please, lead me to the main pillars of the temple. I wish to lean against them and rest for a moment." His request sounded simple and harmless. He sounded like a defeated man who was simply asking for a small comfort in his final moments of suffering. The Philistine lords, seeing this as a sign that his spirit was finally breaking, laughed and agreed. "Let him lean," one of them called out. "Let the mighty Samson rest his weary bones before he meets his end. It will not save him." They thought it was amusing. The idea of the once powerful man needing to lean on the pillars of their temple seemed like a fitting end to the spectacle. They saw it as a final act of surrender, a man seeking support from the very structure built to honor the God who had defeated him. They were eager to get on with their celebration. The young boy, not knowing any better, took Samson by the hand. He was just a servant, following the orders of the lords and the request of the prisoner. He carefully guided the blind man through the throng of people, who parted to let them pass. They made their way to the center of the great hall, to the spot where the two massive pillars stood, holding up the entire weight of the heavy stone roof. The boy placed one of Samson's hands on the left pillar and the other hand on the right pillar, just as Samson had asked. Samson stood between the two great columns, his hands resting on the cool, carved stone. He could feel the immense weight they supported. He could hear the sounds of the thousands of Philistines above him, on the roof, and all around him in the hall. They were still laughing and drinking, celebrating their victory over him. They were completely unaware of what was about to happen. They saw a tired, defeated man seeking a moment of rest. They did not see a warrior preparing for his final, most devastating act of war against his foes. With his hands firmly placed on the two central pillars, Samson bowed his head. He was not bowing to Dagon or to the Philistine lords. He was bowing in prayer to his own God, the God of Israel. He closed his sightless eyes and spoke, not with his voice, but from the depths of his soul. It was a silent, desperate prayer, a final conversation with the source of his true strength. He knew this was his last chance. He had broken his sacred vows and had paid a terrible price for his weakness and his pride. Now he sought forgiveness and one last measure of grace. "Oh Lord God," Samson prayed in his heart, "please remember me." He thought back on his life, on the great gift he had been given, and how he had squandered it. He confessed his failures and his foolishness. He was not asking to live. He was not asking for an escape. He knew his life was over. All he asked for was a return of his legendary power, not for his own glory, but for the glory of God and for vengeance against the enemies who had not only blinded him, but had also mocked his God. He was ready to make the ultimate sacrifice. His prayer continued, desperate and focused. "Please God, strengthen me only this once." It was a humble plea from a broken man. He wanted to use his final breath to fulfill his destiny as a judge of Israel, to strike a final, decisive blow against the oppressors of his people. He asked for the strength not just to push, but to bring down the entire temple upon the heads of the Philistine rulers and their people. This would be an act of judgment that no one would ever forget, a powerful reminder that the God of Israel was the one true God. As he finished his prayer, he felt a change within him. A warmth spread through his arms and into his chest. He felt a surge of power, a familiar feeling he had not known since his hair was cut. It was the strength of God, flowing into him one last time, an answer to his final, faithful request. He knew his prayer had been heard. A quiet resolve settled over him. He was no longer just a prisoner. He was once again Samson the Strong, the chosen instrument of God's will, ready for his last and greatest feat. Samson took a deep breath, the shouts and laughter of the Philistines fading into a distant hum. He was completely focused on the task before him. He adjusted his grip on the two giant pillars, his fingers digging into the carved stone. These were not just columns of rock. They were the very foundation of the Philistines' power and pride, supporting the temple dedicated to their false god. By placing his hands upon them, Samson was placing his hands on the heart of his enemy's kingdom. He could feel the immense weight they carried, the weight of the roof, and the thousands of souls upon it. With a mighty roar that silenced the entire hall, Samson pushed. He pushed with all his might, his muscles bulging and straining under the impossible effort. The power that surged through him was not his own. It was a divine gift, granted for this one final purpose. The Philistines, who had been laughing just moments before, now stared in disbelief and terror. They saw the impossible happening before their very eyes. The man they had mocked as a weakling was now moving the unmovable, challenging the very foundations of their world. At first, nothing happened. The pillars were immense, set deep into the earth. But Samson did not relent. He pushed with every ounce of the supernatural strength that had been returned to him. A deep groaning sound began to fill the temple, the sound of stone straining against itself. Cracks began to appear on the surface of the pillars, spreading like spiderwebs from where his hands were pressed. Dust and small bits of rock began to fall from the ceiling, a warning of the catastrophic collapse that was about to come. The crowd's jeers turned into screams of panic. The two great pillars began to shift. They tilted outwards, away from each other, grinding against the floor and the ceiling. The main support of the temple was failing. The people on the roof felt the floor beneath them begin to tremble and crack. Those in the hall below scrambled to escape, but there was nowhere to go. They were trapped inside their own monument of pride. Samson, the blind champion, was single-handedly dismantling their world, turning their celebration into a scene of divine judgment and ultimate destruction. As the pillars groaned and the temple began to shake violently, Samson shouted his final words. His voice boomed over the screams of the terrified Philistines, a cry of both victory and surrender. "Let me die with the Philistines," he proclaimed. This was his choice, his final destiny. He was not trying to save himself. He was giving his own life to fulfill his purpose. It was the ultimate act of sacrifice, a warrior's death that would also serve as a devastating blow to the enemies of his people. His life would end here, but so would the lives of all the Philistine rulers. The pillars gave way completely. With a deafening crack that sounded like thunder, they shattered and broke apart. The massive stone roof, deprived of its support, hesitated for a moment, and then came crashing down. The entire temple collapsed in on itself, a storm of stone, wood, and dust. The thousands of people on the roof, and the thousands more inside the hall were buried in an instant. The lords, the priests, the soldiers, and the citizens who had come to mock Samson were all crushed beneath the weight of their own temple. In that final moment of chaos and destruction, Samson died. He was buried alongside his enemies, his body crushed by the very pillars he had brought down. He had killed more Philistines in his death than he had during his entire life. Delilah, too, was caught in the collapse, her wealth and status meaning nothing in the face of the falling stones. The grand temple of Dagon, the symbol of Philistine power, was reduced to a mountain of rubble and a tomb for all who had been inside. The celebration had become a funeral. When the dust finally settled, there was only silence. The great city was in shock. All of their leaders, their most important and powerful people, were gone. They had been wiped out in a single catastrophic moment by the man they believed they had conquered. Samson's final act was one of complete and total victory. He had sacrificed himself, but in doing so, he had broken the back of the Philistine oppression. It was a terrible and awe-inspiring end to the life of a man who had been chosen by God for his incredible strength. The story of Samson's final moments did not end in that pile of rubble. His family came from their home to the ruins of the temple. They searched through the destruction and found his body. They carried him back to his homeland with great sorrow and great honor. They buried him in the tomb of his father Manoah, between the towns of Zorah and Eshtaol. His journey was over. The judge who had ruled Israel for 20 years was finally at rest, but the story of his life, and especially of his death, was just beginning to be told. People would talk about Samson for many, many years. They would ask, he was so strong, why did he have to die? But they knew the answer. His death was not a defeat, it was his greatest victory. They remembered his amazing feats, how he killed a lion with his bare hands, how he defeated an army with the jawbone of a donkey, and how he carried away the massive gates of a city. But most of all, they remembered his final sacrifice. They remembered how he chose to die to save his people from their enemies. His strength, they said, would never truly die. It became a legend, a story told to children and their children's children for 1,000 years. It was a story about more than just strong muscles. It was a story about the strength of faith, even after making terrible mistakes. It showed that even when you feel weak and defeated, you can find the strength to do what is right. Samson's life was a lesson in bravery, a reminder that true strength comes from God, and that even in our darkest moments, we can call upon it. And so Samson is remembered not as a perfect hero, but as a real one. He made mistakes, he was tricked, and he suffered. But in the end, his love for his people and his faith in his God were stronger than any chains. His final act of pulling down the temple was a powerful symbol of sacrifice and redemption. That is why his story lives on. It reminds us all that even one person, filled with courage and purpose, can bring down giants and change the world forever. leaving behind a legacy of unforgettable strength.